Բարձես սիրելի հայրենակիցներ, ողջունում եմ բոլորիդ, շնորհակալ եմ, որ միացել եք մեր արդեն ավանդական դարձած հայ-տեխ զրույցներին, բավականին դրական արձագանքներ կան տարբեր շրջանակներից այս ֆորմատի վերաբերյալ, նաև ինձ ասացին, որ բազմաթիվ դպրոցականներ են հետևում այս զրույցներին եւ համոզված եմ, որ իրենց մասնագիտական հետագա ուղղվածության կողմնորոշման համար սա շատ լավ ազդեցություն կունենա։ Ողջունում եմ մեր դպրոցականներին։ Այսպիսով մենք այսօր մեր հյուրը Service Titan ընկերության համահիմնադիր Վահե Կուզոյանն է, որպեսզի ավելի ներկայանալի լինի, կարող եմ ասել, որ մենք Service Titan ընկերությունը դա հայկական ծագման եւ հայերի հիմնադրած ընկերությունն է Կալիֆոռնիայում, Գլենդել քաղաքում, մի բարձրահարկ շենքում, որտեղ արդեն շուրջ 1000 աշխատակից ունեն, եւ մենք հանդիպել ենք 2018 թվականին եւ իհարկե այդ հանդիպումը հրաշալի է անցել Service Titan-ի առաջին հանդիպումը իհարկե իրենց գրասենյակում եւ այնտեղ նաեւ իհարկե իրենք նույնպես մտադրություններ ունեին, բայց մենք պայմանավորվեցինք եւ Service Titan-ը նաեւ իր ներկայությունը ունի հիմա Երևանում եւ այս կարճ ժամանակամիջոցում արդեն իսկ 50-ից ավելի աշխատակիցներ ունի եւ շարունակում է ընդլայնել իր կարողությունները։ Նաև ուզում եմ տեղեկացնել, որ Service Titan-ը 1 միլիարդից ավել է գնահատվում արդեն իսկ շուկայում որպես ընկերություն եւ կարծում եմ, որ այս պահին մեր ունեցած այսպես հայկական ծագման եւ Հայաստանում ներկայություն ունեցող ամենաթանկ ընկերությունն է եւ հուսով եմ, որ նմանատիպ տեմպերով նաեւ իր աճը կապահովի եւ հետագայում Հայաստանի թիմը նույնպես ես գիտեմ, որ պարոն Կուզոյանը պլաններ ունեն, որ այստեղ նույնպես ընդլայնվելու է։ Ես պարոն Կուզոյան ողջունում եմ ձեզ, հուսով եմ, որ լավ եք, ամեն ինչ լավ է եւ գիտեմ, որ բավականին ծանրաբեռնված աշխատանք ունեք եւ բոլորդ տանից եք աշխատում, մեր այստեղ նույնպես այդպես է եւ հուսով եմ, որ առողջ կլինեք եւ կորոնավիրուսը հնարավորինս հեռու կմնա թե մեր համայնքից եւ թե ձեր հատկապես աշխատակիցներից։ Ես դուք բավականին լուրջ ճանապարհ ունեք անցած եւ լուրջ հաջողություններ եք ապահովել տեխնոլոգիական ոլորտում։ Այս պարոն Կուզոյանի այդ բեքգրաունդի հետևի նկարին հանկարծ չխաբվեք, ինքը հիմա Կալիֆոռնիայում է գտնվում։ Իհարկե գիտենք, որ շատ են կարոտում մեր սփյուռքահայերը Հայաստանը եւ մասնավորապես Արարատը Երևանը։ Պարոն Կուզոյան, խնդրեմ, ձեր հրաշալի փորձի մասին կխնդրեմ, որպեսզի կիսվեք մեր զրուցակիցների հետ եւ գիտեմ նաեւ, որ ցանկանում եք հարցեր լինեն մեկնաբանություններում, որոնց վերջում կանդրադառնաք։ Ես ձեզ լավ եթեր եմ մաղթում եւ խնդրում եմ, որպեսզի ձեր հարուստ փորձով կիսվեք եւ ողջևորեք մեր տեխնոլոգիական ոլորտի ներկայացուցիչներին եւ ոչ միայն։
Thank you, Jacob. It's a pleasure to talk again. I'm excited to share whatever insights I may have into tech in general, what's happening today, and our story as well. So I'm excited to do this. Thank you.
Շնորհակալ եմ, ես մեր հետևողների համար ուզում եմ տեղեկացնել, որ պարոն Կուզոյանը Վահեն մեր շատ սիրելի ընկեր է, ցանկություն է հայտնել, որ անգլերեն խոսի։ Մենք խնդրում եմ, որպեսզի հետևեք, մենք վաղը արդեն հայերեն տարերով ուղեկցված այս նույն հանդիպումը կտեղադրենք on-line YouTube-ում եւ ձեր հետ կկիսվենք։ Խնդրեմ ձեզ լավ եթեր եմ մաղթում եւ շնորհակալություն մեր հրավերը ընդունելու համար։
Merci, Jacob. Thank you. So maybe I'll start with just our story with Service Titan, and I'll talk a little more about how I'm seeing the current situation evolve. We the company Service Titan was started by me and my co-founder, Ara Madesyan, who's another Armenian engineer we met in school. And we had a problem that we wanted to solve for our dads. And so we just started this company about a little over 10 years ago. And through a lot of different mistakes and different steps, we figured out product market fit, as they say, and the company started to grow. And so we went from 2 people, and we were 2 people only for about 5 years. And then we grew to a little over 1,000. And as Jakob mentioned, about a year and a half ago, we decided to open an office in Armenia. And it's been very successful. We are very happy with the team so far, and we're looking to actually grow it. So that's just a high-level story about us and kind of the size. I thought it might be more interesting today to talk about actually just technology in general and how it's looking, just given the current situation. You know, from here in California, there's a lot of different technology companies, and a lot of the questions that I get these days is, how is the technology industry doing within this crisis, especially when compared to other industries? And for us, what we've seen is that not just for our company, but a lot of the other tech companies in California and really in the world, there's a big dependency on whether or not the customers that you serve or the users that you serve are being affected. And so there's a pretty big range in what type of impact different types of companies are experiencing. But if you just take a step back and think about the overall industry as a whole, technology specifically, I actually think today, given the changes that are happening, actually present one of the bigger opportunities in a long time for people that are looking to either start a new tech company or to look at figuring out where to invest their time in terms of going to school. So if you're someone who's in high school or in college and you're thinking about where might be a good place, I think it's pretty easy to just look at how the people in the tech industry are being affected today compared to others and the opportunities that exist. Because the way I've always thought about innovation and the role of technology in the world, it's really about looking at how the world is today and then looking at what the world will be tomorrow and being the source of that change. So if we were looking at 1995 and the way the world was in 1995, and then you were to fast forward 10 years later with the changes in internet and computers being accessible by everywhere and so on, that difference was really brought about by some changes in the external world, like internet and computers. But also it was companies like Google and others that realized that there was this change that needed to happen. And so giant companies were born out of the recognition that this change now created this opportunity. So while today's change is obviously very different than the change in the mid-90s and computers and internet, I actually think it still presents an opportunity, because if you look at what's happening right now, companies like Amazon or Shopify, or basically any player that's in the e-commerce space, their demand has exploded. So people's behavior has changed, the world has changed, And there's one group that is already sitting in a position to benefit from that. But I would argue the changes that we're experiencing, especially when you project forward, are also going to have other opportunities present themselves, because the way in which people behave and the way that business is done is now going to be fundamentally altered. So from a technology perspective, if you're a engineer and you're thinking about and what may be a good opportunity, I think the right way to connect the dots are really to think about how has the world changed and what are the gaps that exist now? What are the problems that exist? Whether it's because kids are now at home and they need to still be educated, or it's how food and different things need to be distributed and changed. Like if you look at the other companies that are doing really well right now, it's the delivery companies, because people no longer can go to restaurants and whatnot. Now, the question is, how long will these changes stay, and when can we expect to go back to, let's say, normal life? But that's I don't know if the question of whether or not we'll get to normal anytime soon is really the most important question to ask. I think the most important question to ask is, what are going to be the long-term changes that come out of this whole experience? And from my perspective, there are going to be some long-term changes that come about, and that's where the opportunities would be to potentially look at capitalizing on those. So in total, if I think about, where is the best place to be operating now? In our case, we are a 1,000-person company, and we were able to go from going to the office every day to now we suddenly switched and we are working 1,000 people from home overnight. A lot of industries can't do that. So if we think about especially from a place like Armenia, around where does it make sense for us to focus our energies, I think this is a really good example of the strength of the technology sector, and the resilience that it can have, because we basically just started working and having the same level of productivity as we were when we were in the office sitting next to each other. And I think this is the other big opportunity here, especially for Armenia. And I was telling the team this the other day, was if you're an engineer and you are having to, and you live in Armenia, a lot of the disadvantages that come with that is that if there's an office that the market is in, or the rest of your teammates are in, there's obviously a time difference, but also the physical ability to be there in a office environment is a gap, right? It's a disadvantage that you have. Well, if you look at the way the world is operating now, just like you see Ararat behind me, I could be sitting anywhere in the world, and I have almost, with the exception of the time difference, no disadvantage anymore. And this idea of us being able to go back to a world where everyone's back in the office and working as normal, at least from where we sit today, in my opinion, we don't have the odds of that happening relatively quickly, I think, are low. So to some extent, being an engineer now in Armenia in particular, but really anywhere, it's a great equalizer, because now you're on the same level as anybody else. Your ability to access the market and to talk to customers and everything else is on the same level as someone who may be in the same city, because no one is able to drive around. So for some industries, especially software companies that sell to businesses, enterprise software companies, I actually think the current environment has huge advantages for Armenia, because if you look at the economics of what the cost is of an engineer in San Francisco, for example, versus Yerevan, and you were now to live in a world where everyone works from a camera and a laptop, then the ability to compete, the ability to innovate, and the advantages that you used to have by being in a particular geography have been reduced significantly. So overall, I think from a opportunity perspective, the tech industry as a whole throughout this whole thing is demonstrating some pretty exciting, I guess, attributes about the way it works. And that doesn't mean that it's not affected at all. There are companies that serve, for example, restaurants or travel or other industries that are being negatively affected. Those tech companies are hurting now. There's been a lot of very high profile layoffs that are happening. So it's not to say that technology is some magic bullet that will never face a downturn. But overall, I would say, especially compared to other industries, our ability to be successful in this environment, I would argue, is actually pretty high. The other question that I get a lot these days is really around what the fundraising environment is like. What is it like for tech companies to get funded? And obviously today, the stock market is having some pretty big volatility, and that's a big impact on just the funding climate as a whole. So I would say that for entrepreneurs out there, it is going to be harder to get funding. But the flip side of that is, because the funding is going to be harder to get, the other side of the equation is really around what the costs are and the prices of things. And so I think, given the the consequence that some tech companies are going to be affected by this, it actually creates an opportunity for those people that are going to be negatively affected to now be available on the market. And so from our perspective, we actually think the current environment presents an opportunity to really get amazing talent that would otherwise not have been available. And so what I'm seeing a lot of companies do right now is, first and foremost, they focus on cash, because if they don't have the funding and they didn't have it, getting it now is going to be harder. And so there is an aspect of being very mindful of what your burn rate is and how much time you have with the funding that you have. But the ability to now find problems that weren't there before has also changed. So depending on where you are in that journey, if you are already working on a problem that's now been disrupted pretty heavily, that's a tough situation to be in. And to the extent that there's ability to pivot, I think that there's going to be consequences there. But at the same time, imagine all this new surface area of opportunity that's now there waiting for somebody to come solve it. The world has changed. And I think if you are in a position now to potentially bring a solution to those new problems, in some ways, this is actually better than what it was before the whole industry happens. Because that's where the real power of the tech industry comes from, is the ability to use this thing to solve problems. And when the world changes really quickly and new problems are created, that's where the opportunity comes from. So the other things that I wanted to touch on was really around what happens to innovation, and where should entrepreneurs be looking? So the areas that I find right now are the most interesting ones if you look at the market, for example, Zoom, the tool that we're using here, the stock price has just absolutely shot up. And there's, there's companies in Armenia right now, like CRISPR, that are in that similar vein. So I think there's going to be natural overlap there. And then there's going to be new opportunities that come about. And the new opportunities that I think are the most interesting are actually the ones that are trying to solve for something that we used to do in a different way. Like right now, I have 3 kids. All of them are home, but life goes on. We have to keep them educated. So now we're figuring out how to provide classroom education to kids at the home. So I think that's another really big area of opportunity, because the assumption isn't necessarily that we're going to be in lockdown forever. But if you look at the likely scenario that's going to happen pretty much all over the world, it's that at some point they're going to open it up like they did in Japan, like they did in China. And at some points, until we have a vaccine, this virus will likely have outbreaks sporadically. So the need for people to go back to a quarantine, I think, is going to be with us for a while. So if I was an entrepreneur today looking for what are some potential opportunities, that's a really good problem space to think about, because I think there's a need now there that wasn't there before. And for the startups that are already there and already working, like I mentioned, I actually think this is an amazing opportunity to acquire talent. In our case with Service Titan, that's how we're thinking about this current scenario. And so we are actually looking to accelerate our hiring in Armenia, because we know that there's going to be some companies that are going to be negatively affected, and there's going to be great talent that's going to be out there looking for a home. And so I think that this opportunity is going to exist for a lot of companies out there. So for those of us that are continuing to operate and continuing to thrive, I actually think it's a big opportunity for the overall industry. So I promised that I would keep it under 30 minutes. So I think we're coming up to that time mark. I'm trying to see if there's any questions online that people wanted to answer. Let's see there. Doesn't look like it. Okay, well, we are not getting any questions. I think that just about covers all the things that I wanted to touch on. So thank you everyone for joining. It was a pleasure speaking with you today. And hopefully we'll reconnect soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kouzoyan.